so much space.
Or those guys were a lot younger than.
We had.
The actors, yes.
My goodness.
But it was a black.
Okay, I think we're recording.
Okay.
Ready?
Anyway, I don't know where that's-
All right, everyone, we probably should get started. Thanks for coming. This is what the next to the last program for the fall semester. One more next week. In fact, our speakers for next week is here, right? Good.
See what you're getting yourself into.
Yes, you can see how tough this audience is. You might want to change your mind after. Yeah, with me is our speaker for today, Rex Smith, and Dean Napkin, our co-chair for programs. So I'll turn it over to Dean to formally introduce Rex. So I'm sure everybody knows anyway, but we always go through the formal introductions as part of the program. So.
This is great. Only 2 chairs left. And someone said, no, there's no donation. You don't have to give anything. So front chairs are fine. And this is great. I mean, to have a big crowd. So we appreciate it. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Rex Smith. Smith has been a leading New York State journalist for 4 decades. He writes and publishes the Upstate American, a weekly analysis of news and society, and is the host of the long-running public radio program called The Media Project. Pardon me. Rex spent 25 years with Hearst, including 18 years as editor of the Times-Union, the newspaper of New York's capital region, which he led to state and national recognition for reporting, writing, photography, and design, both in print and on digital platforms. Rex was awarded a master's degree with highest honors by Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism, where he now chairs the alumni board and holds an undergraduate degree cum laude from Trinity University in San Antonio. A lifelong musician, Rex now performs with Albany Pro Musica, one of the Northeast's premier choral ensembles, which he currently serves as board president. He and his wife, the author Marion Roach Smith, live in Rensselaer County, New York. Yay, my side of the river. Their daughter, Grace Yu Ying Smith, is an official of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Rex.
Well, thank you. It's really great to be back with you today and to have a chance to talk about some interesting notions that are kind of playing around in my mind. The difficulty with what I'm going to be talking to you about is that I don't have a conclusion yet. And so I'm going to just throw some ideas out and see if, well, maybe there's something to come of it. But the difficulty is that we are in such a time of transition, in the digital era, that a lot that we think we might have once known, we don't. But to begin our thinking, I want to share with you just a little segment from a movie. This is from Jaws. Remember Jaws, 1975? Look at this one scene, 2.5 minutes or so, and see, I'm going to, now what did I do? There we go. And let's see if there might be something that we can take from this. Go. Okay, that's enough of that. Okay, so it's a wonderful thing. And there's one thing, let's see, stop share. Let me see if I can get myself here. There's a wonderful message. There's something that I noticed in this that I'm going to be pointing toward. Anything you notice about this particular scene that you think might be of interest in a changing world? I'll just point out something. That was one shot, 2.5 minutes with a single camera, a single shot. The whole scene went. Now, I bring this up because in October, some new statistics were released from research in the movie industry. The average shot in a movie is now 5 seconds. So there has been a change in movie making from the time when you could go 2.5 minutes with a single shot. The camera even moved with them around. It was really pretty impressive. And now we are suddenly at a stage where a single shot is 5 seconds. A typical actuality, that is in radio, that's what, when you have the actual voice of the person, is in radio and television, an actuality is now 7 or between 7 and 8 seconds. Whereas it used to be that, of course, 20-some seconds was typical because that way you could get some context. So you may say that we're growing more visually sophisticated, that humans more quickly absorb visual information, and therefore we don't have to just dwell on everything quite as long. Or you could posit that our attention span has shrunk, that we need to shift quickly from one thing to another to keep our interest. So I was intrigued by that because I thought that has some bearing on what I wanted to say to you today. And I found that there's a researcher at UC Irvine, a woman named Gloria Mark. She's actually a psychologist in the Department of Informatics. And she has done 20 years of research, actually, on attention span. And she says that there is, in fact, in her research, evidence showing that attention span is getting shorter. In the particular type of research she was doing, typically attention span averaged 2.5 minutes on any screen before someone would turn away. And now that has gone down to 47 seconds. So by her research, attention span has dropped by 2/3 in 2 decades. And that is one element of what I want to talk about, although this is all broader, because we're talking about generally how differently we communicate and how differently we think and what the implications are for us. Because as I'm saying, I'm speaking to you from my perspective as a journalist of 40 years, including 30 years running newsrooms in this community. As a musician, I performed 23 years with Albany Pro Musica, and I'm in my 3rd year as the board president, which began about the time my retirement from the editorship did, a month before the pandemic shut down. And I think the pandemic actually changed a lot in this country, but this was already moving forward. So I have a premise to argue here, and it's something like this, that there's a thread linking several seemingly disparate elements in our society. Here are some elements that really strike me from my perspective. The loss of authority of the legacy news media, that is like newspapers and television networks and so on. And not only a loss in authority, but a downturn in public interest in the news generally, and a loss of financial support for those, but also a general distrust of those elements of the news media. a loss of audience for performing arts groups. If you look at what's going on at the Metropolitan Opera, which is actually the richest not-for-profit arts organization in America, it's tragic to see the open seats at some of these great operatic performances. Diminishing presence of civic organizations and diminishing role of those civic groups in our communities. You know, the Rotarians and Lions and so on, where are they these days? Well, they're not really as present. Little town where I was the editor of the newspaper in Indiana when I was very young, I was the Rotary song leader. We were a singing Rotary club. So I can sing you the Rotary song if you like. Dave and I'll do a little duet here shortly. He's the tenor, I'm the baritone. I think there is a declining church attendance and declining loss of interest in organized religion generally. And a particular interest, I think, in this room is reduced authority and attractiveness of higher education. What is happening at the College of St. Rose is going to be replicated over and over again across the country. The demographic shift is there. The hostility to higher education that we are seeing these days is just about to grow out of the control of anything. Efforts should have been started years ago to try to reverse that trend. But instead, we are seeing the likely beginning of a terrible situation, I think, for higher education. So what links these sort of various elements that all have to do with a sort of thoughtful approach to our world, I think, is an unsatisfied craving that arises in people from the sort of relentless presence of media and from the pace of change in our society. Because the digital revolution has really tremendously altered the way we interact with the world. It's changed what Americans are seeing and what they are seeking. It has tremendously altered what people want to do with their waking hours, to the point that people are really demanding inspiration and emotional engagement from everything that we ask them to put their time into. Inspiration and emotional engagement. Now, we've always wanted to be inspired. We've always wanted some sort of emotional engagement, but we also had downtimes, and we also were able to find it in ways that didn't bombard our senses. But we want that sensory and emotional stimulation. We want experience, but we don't find it from things that people traditionally have. Reading, for example, well, that's passive, isn't it? You know, it's, I mean, just a book sitting there. It doesn't move. I mean, Minecraft, the video game, has sound and fury and keeps blowing up in your face when you're on screen. Isn't that more exciting than reading a book? Music in an acoustic setting. You know, we sing, Albany Pro Musica is the ensemble in residence at the acoustically perfect Troy Savings Bank Music Hall. What a wonderful place is that hall. It's just gorgeous. But the difficulty is that that's not the kind of music that people look for. They want to be bombarded. They want noise. My wife and I went to a concert there of a group that she remembered from her youth, Little Feat. And I thought, oh, she'll love to go to a Little Feat concert. Well, it was amplified. It was just murky and awful. But the sound requires amplification, but you can't amplify the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall. It ruins the acoustic. So music in an acoustic setting seems unimpressive to most people when you compare it with the sound and the movement extravaganza of Taylor Swift and Beyonce, for heaven's sake. You know, a play on a stage doesn't have quite the thrill of Cirque du Soleil, or, you know, we are looking for a pageant. So we are at a point where so many of these elements that have made such a difference to us, that make such a difference to society, are really imperiled because of the changes that have been wrought by this digital revolution and by the ways people are finding to satisfy their human craving for inspiration and emotional engagement. The reality of the digital age is that we have, and we now demand, instant access to information with colorful moving pictures. So, you know, I worked on newspapers for a long time, and I started in newspapers when every reporter's desk had a glue pot. Actually, we called it a paste pot actually, but it was like rubber cement with a little brush on it, and that's how you would literally cut and paste, and and paste it on here, and then you'd have this long take that you would hand over to your editor, where he would go with a heavy black pencil and edit it. And but the difficulty of newsprint as a mode of delivering the news is really print is and probably should be dead for most journalism, because it's outmoded, because the news is old by the time it gets to you, because it's not as vibrant. You can't correct anything. When we had an error in the paper, oh, it was a terrible thing. But we did find that where we put the corrections on page 2 is one of the best read pages of the paper. There are so many ways in which digital delivery is so much better than print for journalism, but it has changed our willingness to sit and read something. The other thing that the digital revolution does is it leads to quick transitions among topics and screens. And I think that is what has contributed to this attention span change that I mentioned the Irvine professor had come up with. We really, in fact, the key labor saving element that I was advised to adopt when I was in the last few years of my editorship was that I needed to have 3 screens. A single screen in front of me, which I now use in my retirement, 1 screen. Imagine that, except that I do always have my iPhone open as well. But that is a great, when something is loading, or you can search and write at the same time, basically, and then always be monitoring what you're publishing. But that's a ridiculous notion of having to have that much attention going on, so that you have 3 screens, plus I was in a 3 glass walled office with the newsroom going on out there. So there's a lot of stuff. It's no wonder that I'm much happier retired. We expect exciting content in the palm of our hands. Video games, or at least, Wordle, something, to keep us going when nothing else is happening. To the point that when you do sit back and relax, when you do lift your eyes and take a long view of the horizon of a mountain in a distance, you kind of ask yourself, what am I missing? And the FOMO, the fear of missing out, is the thing that I think so much drives us to those handheld devices. What am I not going to know that I need to know at this moment? Well, maybe you don't need to know at this moment. The latest outrageous pronouncement of Donald Trump is not going to make you feel any better knowing it now than it will make you feel 8 hours from now. I promise you. We are disappointed with music that isn't enhanced by high technology headphones, so that the sound totally fills our head. We may be thrilled by it, but plus it's hard to repeat it right away. If you're listening to a symphony orchestra and you hear this wonderful passage, like in the Hallelujah chorus, my favorite little part is when the trumpet goes, just a little 8th note run, but it's beautiful. And I just want to hear it over and over again. But, you can't if it's live, it's gone. And there's something thrilling about that, but we don't tolerate that much anymore. We should be able to rewind, wherever the movie went, and have it. So I think a question is, where do people go now to find inspiration, engagement, and emotional stimulation? Lay aside intellectual stimulation, because, the hostility to learning and to science these days that is being encouraged by the political class is something that is a very destructive force. But we all know that it's very present. And it's, of course, there was it yesterday, I believe, or the day before, that that's one of the elements of journalism these days. You don't know when something is actually published because you read it digitally and then you read it in print, and the news is all around you, and there's so many news sources you don't know where you read it. But the notion of in higher education now, Florida is becoming a state that academicians are fleeing as a result of what's going on the campuses there. And I think we will find that there will become pockets of America where education is less thoughtful than we've been accustomed to. So where do people turn for inspiration, engagement, emotional stimulation, educational enhancement, information? And how do we deliver to people if we are concerned about this? How do we deliver it? Here's the difficulty. I'll just start from my own personal perspective as a journalist. I care very deeply. People don't go into journalism to make money. There's never been a person who said, well, I'm going to become a newspaper reporter because I hear they get rich, because it's not true. So we all are mission driven, and people don't like to hear that because it's good to make fun of journalists and to talk cynically about the press. But the fact of the matter is, especially those of us who came of age during Watergate, most of us who turned to journalism at that time did so with a sense of mission, that we thought we could make a difference in this world. And so it matters to me greatly that journalism is under attack and that people are turning away from it. Of course, and it's not just newspapers. I could get nostalgic about it because I love the smell of newsprint, and the thrill. When I was the editor of the Record in Troy in the early 90s, I had an office that overlooked the press, and when the press would start rolling, the building would shake a little bit. It was just so exciting. And only once did I actually get to say, "Stop the press." It was great. There was a mistake, and we could take care of it by just erasing a zero. It was wonderful. But lay aside print and nostalgia for that. In 2016, by which time we were very far into the digital revolution, still 51% of US adults, majority of US adults, said that they followed the news all or most of the time. But in just 5 years, that is 6 years, by 2022, that's last year, that had fallen by 1/4. Now just 38% of the people pay attention to the news all or most of the time. That is, they say they follow the news. They're maybe telling the truth. But when I started in newspapering, 84% of adults would say, yes, I read a newspaper yesterday. 84%. And that number, the people who say, yes, I read a newspaper yesterday, is 16%. That's what has happened in newspapers. And that 16% number in 2016 was the bottom line. 16% in 2016 said they followed the news never or hardly at all. Those news averse people have gone from 2016 to 2022. That has more than doubled in 5 years. Now, 38% of Americans say they follow the news never or hardly at all. Now, that is, it's not statistically uniform. There is a political division of that. And that is actually part of a concern to me. And I'm sorry if this sounds like a political prejudice. It is a journalistic prejudice. And the journalistic prejudice is that there are no good journalists who work for Fox News. You cannot trust what you hear on Fox News. The selection of stories is biased. The presentation is biased. And so the problem is people who say they follow the news may be people who are just watching Sean Hannity. And that's not following the news, folks. So I'm really worried about the fact that people are getting no news, or they're getting stuff that is proto-news, stuff that is not real news, and still think they're getting information. And the results are seen in the decline of respect for our democracy and the decline of engagement on the issues. and the pursuit of politics as a mean sport as opposed to being a civic undertaking. The thing that has gone along with that, of course, and again, I'm starting from the media because it's just the stuff that has been the fundamental part of my career. Only 32% of Americans say they trust the mass media to at least a fair amount to report the news. And an all-time high of 39% say that their trust level in the media is none at all. In the 1970s, that 39% figure now, no trust at all. No, I'm sorry, it's the other way around. The 32% who do trust the media, that is half what it was in the 70s. In the 70s, you would get about 72%, 68 to 72% said, yes, I trust that most of the time they get it right. And that's now down to 32%. I guarantee you, it's not that reporters have become less able. In fact, journalists are more likely to present reporting that goes behind the story that they are handed now than they did when I was first starting in the field. That is, it is deeper, but people trust it less. And of course, the newspaper publishing is going away. One third of the newspapers that were publishing in America in 2005, which to me doesn't feel like so long ago, 1/3 of those newspapers will be dead by the end of next year. We are now losing 2.5 newspapers every week in America. So there are about now 6,000 newspapers left in America. About 1,200 of them are daily, 4,800 are weekly, and even those little weeklies are going away. And actually, one of the difficulties is the very place where the weeklies are especially vanishing. The place where newspapers are dying, since most of them are weeklies, the very place where they are dying is where they're needed the most, because it's places that wield disproportionate political power. I grew up in the Black Hills of South Dakota. We moved there when I was 8 years old, and it was just great because suddenly, little boy was out there among the cowboys, and that was, cowboys were a big deal at my age. So South Dakota has 66 counties. 7 of them have no newspaper at all. 30 some have at best a single weekly paper. But here's the thing. Because of the anti-majoritarian elements of the U.S. Constitution, the Electoral College, the United States Senate, both do not reflect majority rule. Because of those elements, the people of South Dakota have more political clout than we do. I lost political power when I moved away from South Dakota. I couldn't vote yet, so I guess I gained it. But each of South Dakota's, let me compare it to Texas, for example, because that's a rising state and it would be less partisan that way. Each of South Dakota's nearly 600,000 registered voters has double the weight in the Electoral College of the voters in Texas. Twice as much weight. Theirs count more. And in the Senate, each voter has about 28 times more power in South Dakota than each voter in Texas. 28 times more power. So the power of American political power is especially intense in those rural states where the newspapers are going away. And while there is now a growing ecosystem of digital news sources to replace newspapers, it's nowhere near enough to replace the little weekly papers. There's some wonderful digital news sources that are growing. I'm on the board of one called the Adirondack Explorer, which also puts out a magazine up in the Adirondacks, but they have 2 websites, Adirondack Almanac and Adirondack Explorer, and they just do a great job of reporting. The editor is a former Times Union reporter, Jim Odato, and the publisher used to be a senior editor for the Times Union. It's a great thing. And I'm also on the board of a statewide investigative reporting project called New York Focus. Those are not-for-profit newsrooms that are trying to fill in the gap of reporting that has vanished as newspapers have. And the difficulty is that while they can do some wonderful reporting, and they do, the Explorer has had a great series recently on housing in the Adirondacks, which is a huge issue because there isn't enough low-cost housing to provide homes for the people who actually support the tourist infrastructure that those of us who visit there depend upon. So while they can do this kind of reporting, really great in-depth work, there isn't anything that is really stitching the communities together. There aren't the weekly papers that provide the fabric of the community. When I was the editor of the Record in Troy in the early 90s, we had 24 stringers. Every little community had somebody who would go to the town board meetings, would go to the school boards, and I would pay them. Some of them would get as much as $25 an article. Some of them would settle for 15. But they weren't great professional reporters, but I had a terrific professional editor. He's now the senior editor of the Democrat and Chronicle in Rochester, the lead editor for Gannett in the state of New York. He would, kind of try to make them into stories. But these reporters had funny habits. Like one of them, there was a lady who had, I think, 11 kids or something, and she was the egg lady in her rural Rensselaer County community. And so everybody knew her, and she could just write everything about what was going on in her community because she would go to the back door of every home to deliver eggs, And now there's a downside to that. Every now and then, I found out later, the town supervisor would, I can't remember her name. Her name was something like Lorena, and he would sometimes turn to her during a town board meeting and say, "Now, Lorena, this next part's going to be off the record." And she, "Oh, okay." And she put away her notebook. That's not how journalism works, but at least there was an effort, and at least we had the not just the flesh on the bones of coverage, but we had the bone marrow. We knew what was going on in those communities. And at the little paper in Indiana, where I was the editor when I was very young, we had literally even the social scene, who was visiting who in the community of Remington or in DeMott and Wheatfield, and that's gone. Very few places does that still exist. There are now ghost newspapers. For example, the Poughkeepsie Journal, which was a wonderful newspaper down in the Hudson Valley. Poughkeepsie Journal had about 50 people in the newsroom. Now that newspaper is run out of the Gannett newsroom in White Plains. There is a single reporter assigned to cover the city of Poughkeepsie by that Gannett newspaper that is based in White Plains. So you have ghost newspapers that basically have a nameplate that says Saratogian or something, but it isn't really local content except for a little tiny bit of it. So that is a loss of fabric in the community that is significant. And the same thing is true. My family must have a propensity for choosing dying professions because my dad was a clergyman in mainstream American Protestantism. And boy, that's a dying breed too, I thought he was a pretty important guy as I was growing up. And he probably was. He had a big downtown church in our hometown. And when the senator would come to town, he was the guy my dad was the guy who they'd have come do the invocation in the days when they had an invocation before a senator would speak. But American religion is in trouble at a level beyond newspapering. Percentage of Americans who seldom or never attend religious services. It is now 57%. A decade ago, it was 43%. This is seldom or never. So that's a jump of about a third in a decade. 1/3 more people are saying I seldom or never attend church. And the percentage who actually are engaged with religion at all has similarly risen. And so and we might even talk then, so if people are not getting the premise again being that people are looking, they're craving experience, emotional impact, and inspiration. Where are they getting it? I came across this wonderful comment from the Los Angeles Times theater critic, a guy named McNulty, Charlie McNulty. And he wrote this recently. Theater as an institution may have evolved, but audiences haven't fundamentally changed since they started gathering at dramatic festivals in ancient Greece. What they want is to be absorbed, to lose themselves for a couple of hours in a grander vision that leaves their hearts and minds a little larger than when they took their seats. I think that's a marvelous notion of what audiences want, but it's very difficult to figure out how to deliver that to them and what we can do to kind of convince an audience that we have something that will give them that spiritual growth. Our board meetings of Albany Pro Musica really reflect that concern, because if we just give people beautiful songs, great music, well, that's wonderful. And some people love music enough that that's satisfying to them. But more often, what we really need to do is give people an emotional window that some music can deliver, but for some people it does not. And so you wonder, well, should we experiment? And you think about what did RPI build when they needed to have a new facility for performance? Well, they built Impact, the Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center. Now, what Impact can do that the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall cannot, and the Palace certainly cannot, is can give you an inclusive experience. We've done a couple of pieces that reflect that. The Armed Man, a piece that had a lot of video of 20th century wars with some music that was suddenly terrifying. What's the name of the piece about the Joan of Arc? You remember that? We twice have done this piece with a wonderful classic silent film of Joan of Arc, where a composer has written music that is timed to the film, and it's just tremendously moving. And so this, it's like music video, but it's live music. Last summer at SPAC, the women of Albany Pro Musica performed movie music with Philadelphia Orchestra, and the movie was going on the screen at the time for the SPAC audience. This summer, by the way, this hasn't been publicly announced yet, but here we go. The Albany Pro Musica will be joining the Philadelphia Orchestra for Carmina Burana up at SPAC. Now that's an engaging piece. People love that. So that's great. But we just don't know what it is that can. The difficulty is that there is actually less theater in America these days, fewer venues, literally, fewer productions, fewer performances. This is a challenge all the way around. I'm glad I'm not in Megan Manson Cahill's position at the Rep, because costs are up. The government assistance that kept many theaters open during the pandemic has mostly been spent. Audiences are smaller than before the pandemic, which I think is a kind of a byproduct of shifting lifestyles, because people are not commuting to work as much because they're working at home. They're doing more streaming of video into their home. You can get good movies at home now. So the fact is, the habit of live attendance at arts events has been broken, just as the habit of going to the office has been broken. And so you need to do something really remarkable these days, I'm afraid, to try to lure people back into live performance venues. So the notion of all these disastrous things that I've been telling you about is that we have lost some human touch, I'm afraid, with some very crucial elements of what has made life special for us. We're losing the link to verifiable, accurate information that has been presented by the legacy media over the years. And while there are great efforts to bring into the fore some new brands and new tries, we still do not have that link locally. We've lost the connection to our local religious community for many reasons, some of them perhaps good, but it is denying people that spiritual link that somehow sustained them and often fueled the conscience of a community. We're losing the thrust of academia and the power that academic institutions often exercise in community far beyond just the education of students in the classroom. The impact of the loss of the St. Rose campus on that community of Albany is huge. And the loss of the intellectual vitality of faculty when a community loses those players is an enormous factor. We can all trace. We've probably all known of communities where colleges have died in prior downturns, but I'm afraid it's going to become much more like an epidemic. And so that is leading us to a notion of where are the opportunities for us to re-engage with people? How do we find the path forward to deal with the changes that we are confronting? And this is where I wish I had a complete answer for you. Remember, I told you at the beginning of this, this is an incomplete thought because we can see the loss of authority, the loss of, we can see Americans groping for something to believe in. This is where Barack Obama got in trouble during the 2008 campaign when he said, so people grab for their guns and their religion. It was actually, he was quoted out of context. He got in trouble for sounding arrogant. But what he was saying was people have a spiritual hunger and they're trying to find it. And so where do they turn to find it? Well, you turn to people who maybe seem to have the same point of view as you politically. But the difficulty is if you get an emotional impact from that, but it's not a trustworthy source of information, what does that do? And I do believe that American democracy is imperiled by a presidential candidate who makes very clear that he is interested in authoritarian rule and who tried to overturn the last election. I do think that people grab for connection in some sort of if they can find an artificial stimulus. And what do we see except this terrible epidemic of drug abuse in the society, which reaches every level of the economic strata, and I think that has to be considered a function of this hunger that we have for inspiration and engagement. We know that colleges and universities have had to invest so much more in mental health services than ever before, and you can't find enough people actually to fulfill that role. But the rising level of suicide and less significant emotional upheaval among young people is something for us to worry about. It's indeed a difficult thing. I think that we, as a result, need as citizens to take very seriously our responsibility to engage in the political process, to bring some thoughtfulness to the partisan rancor. I think that we need to support the arts community that brings some of those emotional elements to people. We need to be fully engaged with local education. We need to be doing everything we can to support our local schools, which are under threat. It is perhaps not surprising that homeschooling has risen significantly. Maybe this is a good thing, but I think that it denies kids the engagement that's really helpful for them. But I can understand why a parent might decide that they don't want their kids to be in a dangerous or a less capable school system. For some people, that might be a valid choice. But I think we need to seriously look at the task of citizenship and engagement, because that is fundamentally where we have made a difference in this country. We are when Tocqueville was traveling America in the 1830s, the observation that he made was that Americans knew what was going on at a level that was not found among the ordinary citizens of Europe. Americans were engaged in their communities. They were engaged with each other, and they were trying to help each other. And that is what America was, but that's so long ago, that's almost 200 years ago. And that sense of engagement and support and spirit is, however, fundamental to what gave us this great country, that plus our vast store of natural resources. And we need to be as engaged with that as we can be, I think. Now, we're retirees. So, on the one hand, it's nice for us to say, well, I did my part. And at a certain level, that's true. But we also have opportunities, I think, to put ourselves out there and to do what we can to make a difference. Still, I just came from a doctor's office. I have a knee that's causing me trouble, and I really, I've several times had to go to this guy to fix my bones, and he was laughing. He said, "Well, Rex, it's getting kind of late in the fourth quarter, man." Oh, come on. Break it to me gently. And so, but there are comebacks on the gridiron. And I think that's an opportunity for all of us, is to do what we can, to engage as we can, and to make the best we can out of a very challenging time. So anyway, before the time is up, I thank you for listening to my rambling, and hope we can do some more. And the questions, if there are questions or thoughts that you all have, I'd welcome them. Thank you. Professor Slade, yes, sir.
Doing a clip of Jaws, and I remember that with great affection.
Yeah.
I have not seen Bobby Doll. What made that so palatable to people and moviegoers?
Barbie, yeah.
And it is made over $1 billion.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. My wife was just, my wife is not a shrinking violet. My wife was just complaining this morning that the New York Times movie critic list of 10 best movies of the year did not mention Barbie. And she said, how can that be? What's going on? There was all these movies that she'd never heard of, she says, and she's pretty smart. Well, I don't know, Barbie, it was a supposedly a radical feminist point of view, right? Because it was saying that Barbie in real life realized that she was shallow. So I think that's what it was. And it was pretty, it was shot in these bright, vibrant colors. Does anybody have a better idea? Why was Barbie so big?
It's nostalgia.
Nostalgia? Yeah.
My daughter, she just I laughed through it. It was so funny. You have to play with Barbies.
Yeah.
Nostalgia.
Yeah. Maybe that's it.
And that's the demographic audience.
Yeah.
Little girls that played with Barbies. And the dramas they had. Oh yeah.
Yeah, they're all grown up
they're
now.
grown up.
Yeah.
They have, it's a bygone
Well, that's the
era. There's a
Yeah.
feeling of the
Yeah.
the nostalgia.
Yeah. Yeah. Where are you staying?
A couple of comments about attention span.
Yeah.
I have made it a practice for the past several years now of using my DVR like crazy. I never watch anything live.
Huh.
I record it, and then when I watch it, I fast forward through all the commercials.
Ah.
Now,
That's the reason the movies are going bad.
commercials have always had quick cuts and so on.
Yeah.
But when you fast forward through them, you realize it's
Yeah.
like that. It's no more than 2 or 3 seconds. Everything is cut to cut to cut to cut to cut to cut to cut. And so I think advertising is kind of at the forefront
Right.
of pushing.
Always
all that.
is.
But then there's what feels to me like a counter trend, and maybe I'm wrong about this. Recently, there has been an increase in the number of podcasts.
Uh-huh.
And I've always thought that was kind of odd because it's reducing the immediate involvement. You're not actually watching, seeing things. You're having to sit there and listen. And some of the podcasts I've subscribed to, I found very interesting, but it's more like going back to radio, and you have to devote more time and attention to it in order to do it. And I'm kind of surprised that in the midst of all these things that I agree are occurring,
Yeah.
we seem to have this phenomenon of the podcasts that seems to be counter to the trend.
I think that it could be that a lot of people, especially the next generation down or two, are multitasking during podcasts, not just driving, but also walking.
Oh, that would drive me crazy. When I listen to a podcast, I want to actually.
Yeah. Reminds me, remember when transistor radios, like it used to be like this size? There was a Mad Magazine cartoon showing diseases of the current time. One had an ear growing around the transistor radio because people used to walk like this all the time. But so podcasts are more like that now. People are doing that. But it is true that one of the difficult things I teach with my wife how to write the op-ed. And when you're writing for radio or for podcasts, any writing for audio, you have to write very simply, and you can't use compound complex sentences. You can't use language that makes people stop and admire your prose, because they'll be thinking about that word. If you say, the sky was azure, people say, azure? Wait, which color is azure? And so then you're off. You've lost them. So that is actually one of the difficult things about sound. I agree. I'm surprised actually that podcasts are so popular, but they're big. But there is a cutback. There has been a slight reduction now in the past several months. Some podcasts there has been a reduction. There it is like the market is getting a little bit more mature. There was back in the back. Yeah.
Mid-80s, there was a television show called Max Headroom.
Oh God.
Oh yes.
And I remember this one part where evidently there was some disease going around where the ads on television were getting shorter and shorter, so short that the light and sound would explode your brain. It occurred to me when you said these are shortening.
Yeah.
Back when I was a kid, there were 7.5-second ads.
Yeah. 7.5 seconds.
Yeah.
Huh. You could divide a minute into 4. Huh. That's interesting.
The early coffee commercials with the Muppets.
Huh. Oh,
7.5 seconds.
the Muppets. You were a kid during the Muppets. See, you're younger than I am. There were no Muppets when I was a kid.
But there's some 7.5, 15-second ads.
Huh.
There were
Cool.
60s and 70s.
Yeah. Huh. Well, I like Dave was saying, advertising is always kind of at the forefront of these things. As the ads are going, I think the rest of communication.
The technology.
Yeah, they drive the technology and the communication. Yes, right here.
First of all, you're my employer once removed, I guess. My kids, when you were just starting at the TU, were delivering your paper.
Oh, God bless him.
It's in your talk, but I think I want to go back. I've witnessed here teaching at SUNY, and I've watched it in the schools that the kids have more rights, more responsibilities. And it is very hard now to flunk somebody who's done flunking work. And that nothing is going to kill the ability to think for more than 20 seconds than never requiring them to think. For more than 20 seconds. And I worry about it because I don't see an easy way to.
It's probably not only flunking, it's probably even how do you give somebody a C or a D, right? Right. Yeah.
The critical level is going.
Yeah. I'm sure that's true. But that began even when I was an undergraduate, I think. There was already because I remember hearing as I was applying to schools about the gentleman's C, and I thought, no way, I'm not gonna feel that I'm a gentleman if I'm getting a C. We all expected that we would excel. And well, you can't, it's that line from Garrison Keillor's radio show, all the children are above average. Statistically impossible. Yes.
It seems like what you're describing is a generational transformation. It's probably going around,
Yeah.
going on all over the world, seems.
Oh, yeah. I bet that's true. You know what, that it would be a very good thing to just look into. I think there's probably some societies surely where it's not, but we might not know. I think there is there's great concern about higher education in China, that it's not doing well in China either. And part of it is also that there are no American students, very few American students going to China now for studies. And we aren't allowing as many into this country. And so, but the thing about it is that America has been for so many years the center of higher education, the place that people would send their young people, that the diminution here has global impact. And as we diminish the value of it, or as we fall behind, I think the loss is going to be huge for our society and for the rest of the world too.
Trades are becoming
Trades.
a new thing. There's a
Yep.
lack of high school students, or there was a lack of high school students moving into the trades. That's starting to reverse.
Yeah.
With VOTEC programs and things like that. And I'll cite one of my grandsons who went out and found his own internship and got a job in a welding shop.
Yeah.
And it was in VOTEC. He's getting paid as a senior in high school.
Yep.
His internship is being done with this welding shop. And he's learning, he's being challenged, and he's getting a paycheck.
Yeah. And the world we need electricians and plumbers. And so that's a great thing. But it's hard to, I mourn the impact on the liberal arts. Are you raise your hand up? Are you? Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure what I'm asking, but it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me when I'm reading the Times Union these days that the articles are actually more in depth than in the past.
Yeah.
That you have some that go over several pages.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that's a deliberate strategy. And my question is, how does that, if the observation is attention span is getting shorter, how is that a strategy for saving newspapers?
Well, there are several things I could say about that. Actually, is part of the architecture of that. But you remember Abraham Lincoln writing a letter saying, I apologize for the length of this letter, but I have lacked the time to make it shorter. So at a certain level, letting an article go longer is actually easier. But you do have intent to make some articles shorter so that those that need to go long can go long. The longer articles, if people are following the plan, are those that are investigative pieces, they're accountability journalism, as we call it, that are trying to do something right. And that you're not going to get as many readers of that as you will this 300-word piece that just pops out there, something that's going on in the community. But that long piece also, you're not going to get as many readers, but you're going to get policymakers. You're going to get people who you're trying to influence. So the big long articles really have a target audience, and they are there in part also to enhance the credibility. And some stories just need to have length. There are sometimes you go on too long. I was a young reporter on Long Island at Newsday, which was a very rich and successful newspaper at that time. And I remember doing a 4-part series on the refinancing of the bonds of the Southwest Sewer District. It was very exciting journalism. 4 parts. So, sometimes journalists need to be told just make it shorter. So, but there are some, there is a real need for length on some of these pieces that do the kind of deep storytelling. When we first at the Times Union made a big, something big about Nexium, the cult that was based in Half Moon, we did a big 4-part series that was deep because we thought we had to expose this. Tragically, nobody in position of authority paid attention. Not the local DA in Saratoga or Albany counties, not the U.S. attorney in Northern New York. I called the Attorney General of New York and he didn't want to pay attention. And finally, it wasn't until 3 years later when the New York Times put the story on the front page that then the Southern District, the attorney, U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York got engaged. And that's why they're all in prison now. Had officialdom responded when the Times Union first did this big story, those women who got branded by that doctor at St. Peter's would not have happened because the cult had not yet gotten to that point when we wrote the story. So there is an impact of good journalism and an impact when people ignore it. So we've gone beyond time here, I believe, right? Thank you. I gotta go. Thank you all so much.
Thank her. Really appreciate
Yeah.
His screen, the way he was standing, look at how many copies of.
I know, that's what I was trying.
It's weird, is he this time?
What we screwed up this time. I don't know. I don't know how we screwed up this time, but we did.
Hit record.